Welcome to our first GARP Caribbean Chapter Meeting for 2013. And for those who don't know, especially those in the Caribbean, my name is Brian Langren, and I'm the Regional Director for the GARP Caribbean Chapter. Today we're going to discuss a very interesting topic, integrating ERM and strategy management. And we have today a special speaker, special in that she's actually an active participant in our meetings. I think this is the first time, outside of Trushil Jean, who has presented one or two times to this meeting. Claudine also is the second person out of our number of speakers we've had over the years that has agreed to present to our meeting. And I expect that this year in particular we'll have a number of our own participants presenting at the meeting. And I'll be calling you if you don't volunteer, but hopefully we can have that going. So Claudine Tracey, she'll discuss critical practical efforts to identify and manage strategic risks and incorporate them into the corporate ERM framework. In terms of a brief background, Claudine is General Manager, Risk and Strategy at the Development Bank of Jamaica. She's responsible for risk management, strategy management, research, business analytics, and compliance. She's held previous positions in a number of these areas in the financial sector, including at JN and NCB. Claudine holds a BSc in Economics and Psychology and an MBA from the University of the West Indies. She also has postgraduate diplomas and certifications in business management, risk management, and strategic planning. Please welcome Claudine Tracey, and we'll accept questions at the end of our presentation.
Good evening, GARP family. I'm very happy to share with you tonight, especially since I'm, one of your own. When Brian invited me to speak, as innocent as Brian looks, he's quite a crafty and smooth fellow. I actually called him to ask him for help on a project that I was working on. And I don't know at what point he asked and at what point I agreed, but I'm here. All right, let's get into it. Integrating ERM and strategy management is a topic that I am very, very passionate about. Clearly, since as Brian spoke of before, my job title is literally strategy management and risk management. So I am forced to integrate it, even if I didn't want to, but I do. And the subtopic, creating and protecting value as imperatives for business sustainability. Creating value, again, is something that I'm very passionate about. I consider myself to be a career strategic planner and a recent enterprise risk manager. And that's what I believe that my function and my role is all about. All right, briefly, we're going to talk about basic principles, just a little bit of theory, just a little bit, and just the groundwork. And then the real practical stuff, I'm going to focus on two areas that we can get very quick and very effective wins on in the whole journey in integrating strategy and risk management, and that is in scenario planning and dashboard reporting. And then lastly, I'm just going to speak to you on just some rules of thumb from my experience in this area. All right, so I'm not going to ask you whether the glass is half full or half empty, right? No psychological test. What I'm going to do is tell you a story, a true story. So once upon a time, I was working at another government agency. I had just left the private sector, and I was in charge of corporate planning at that entity. In that department or division, you had risk management, you had corporate planning, and you had a few other functions like quality management, etc., etc. So there was a risk manager on board who came at the same time I did. So about 3 or 4 months into the job, I was tasked to prepare the corporate plan, so we're having a strategic retreat. And at that retreat, we were to present to the executives and senior managers the strategy for the organization. And I should have taken this as a clue from the onset. Let's call them the CEO, would have been hearing the strategy for the first time, because the CEO was a little bit too busy to actually take an active role in the forming or even the editing then of the strategy. So that was the first clue. Anyway, so we're at the retreat. The risk manager is presenting the key business risks of the organization. So like a good risk manager, they did their risk control self-assessment, they met with the critical business areas, they identified the key risks, they analyzed them, impact probability, imminence, and they came up with management strategy along with the rest of the senior management team, and now the person is producing the findings. So she's at the podium, risk one, and she says risk one. The CEO kind of clears her throat. I said, okay. Risk two, the CEO rises to his feet. Risk three, the CEO is literally at the podium and told the risk manager, can you kindly go and sit down? Then she proceeded to say, she proceeded to say that she was a bit confused because she thought this was a strategic planning session. And how can we be talking strategy and be talking about risk at the same time? Because as far as she's concerned, risk is about destroying strategy. Risk is about destroying value. And then she said the infamous words, everybody in this room is seeing the glass as half empty. Because the more you focus on the risk, the more you see the glass as half empty. And when you look beyond the risk and look purely at the strategy, then the glass will be half full. I left that meeting obviously very perturbed, saying something just doesn't add up. Something doesn't make sense. And at that point in time, I made two decisions. One very obvious and conscious one, and another kind of subconscious one that, listen, as long as I'm in this business of strategic planning, risk management has to play an integral part. And contrary, risk management is a part of the adding of value. In fact, it's protecting the value that you add to the strategy and the sustainability of the company. And in protecting that value, inherently it is adding value. So that is basically the theme of my sharing. So, Development Bank of Jamaica. Anybody ever heard of the Development Bank of Jamaica? Yeah. Hands up? Yes? All right, this was my marketing poll. Good. All right, so DBJ, as its name suggests, is a development bank. So we're in the business of lending to the productive sector, lending to the businesses. And that is our beautiful building right across from Emancipation Park. And we're a proud sponsor of Jamaica 50. Good. Our mission, in essence, is to facilitate economic growth and development through financing for the most part, but we also have other critical services. We offer advisory and secretarial support for what we call the 4 Ps, public-private partnerships and privatization. And we also offer capacity building and technical support to the MSME sector. We have 3 main goals. And at a time as now, we see how critical they are. And those are our business lines. So how do we go about this business of enterprise risk management at the Development Bank? This is a broad sketch of our ERM framework. It starts with what we call the architecture, and we use an interpretation of the COSA framework. So the architecture is about the governance structure and the managing structure of the ERM process. The ERM strategy has to do with our risk philosophy, our risk tolerance, our appetite, our strategic risk, our scenario planning. All of that forms a part of our ERM strategy. And then the ERM protocols are the tools and the templates and the models and the methodologies that we use to analyze and assess risk. And we have a wide range of such models. Let me just touch on the governance structure because I believe this is a very critical area for ERM. So the board of directors, who is headed by Joseph Matalon, has overall oversight of the ERM. There is a ERM board subcommittee. This is separate from the audit committee. This is separate from the investment and finance committee. So its sole mandate is enterprise risk management. Under the ERM board subcommittee in this governance structure, we have the managing director, the strategy and ERM unit that manages the ERM system. Senior managers have overall oversight of their own functional areas. We have active risk champions as well who are responsible for risk reporting and some of the analysis. As I said, internal audit has a separate board committee, and they are responsible for assessing the adequacy of the ERM system. And yeah, I like to think of audit and ERM as partners. It's really, you know, we've heard the analogy of the first, second, third line of defense, where the first line of defense is really the business functional areas in terms of risk management. And the second line of defense is at the ERM level. And internal audit plays a very important role as the third line of defense. All right, here's my 2 slides of theory, just 2. But I believe it's very important for me to define strategic risk, especially because I suspect I'm surrounded by FRMs, financial risk managers. Are there any strategic risk managers here? No. Any operational risk managers? No. Any financial risk managers? All right, so who are you then? Strategic risk. Strategic risk, in essence, is the uncertainty that happens that can impact an organization's strategy. So any uncertainty that impacts the strategy can be classified as a strategic risk. Also, strategic risks are risks that emanate from strategy, from a change in strategy or from an additional strategy, and uncertainty arises, again, strategic risks. So just bear that in the back of your mind. Again, let me just talk about the evolution of risk management very quickly. We have time on the X, value on the Y, and of course, it started off with the financial aspect, and the focus, there was heavily focused in the early years on financial risk management, and we all have a good appreciation of what that is. And then it kind of evolved into operational risk management, where the focus was now on business units and controls and accountability at the functional levels, and how do you mitigate your business risk, because there was the realization that risk went beyond financial risk, but that every functional area of a business had its own risk. And then enter the enterprise risk management, which the focus is on both strategic risk and operational risk. All right, moving forward. There are some basic strategic management, risk management principles. Just will touch on 2 of them. Again, my favorite, value-driven. Strategic risk management is all about protecting and enhancing the value of an organization and the value added, and how that organization can continue to be successful and sustainable. Another important principle is the if-then principle. And this is especially, again, as it relates to changes in strategy. If company X pursues this strategy, then what? And if we don't pursue this strategy, then what? What are the risks that can arise? And there are some more principles. All right, changing tides. I'm going to put up a statement on the screen, and I want you to think about the extent to which you agree or disagree to the statement. There we go. SRM, strategic risk management, is nice to have. Can all agree with that? Or can we? But FRM is what really matters. When it comes down to it, your market risk, your liquidity risk, your credit risk, these are the nuts and bolts that really matter. All right. Has anybody ever heard of James Lamb? James Lamb is, I guess, for me, one of the greatest authorities in the field of enterprise risk management. He is, I think he was the inaugural risk manager of the year for GARP. And he has a book called Enterprise Risk Management, and he has a number of studies and publications on it. In 2003, he predicted that ERM would become the industry standard for risk management. Let us look on some of the findings that he found in this chart that was also validated by other research by Deloitte and some other organizations. All right. His study found that this is for United States companies listed on the stock exchange, that for companies that experience declines in their market value, 10% of those companies was due to financial risks, 30% operational risks, and 60% strategic risks. Again, some may argue, well, what was the sample? Was it a mixture of banks and other organizations? And yes, it was a representative sample from the stock exchange, so I suspect that if you just isolated banks alone, it would be a little bit different. But there is a general trend towards companies realizing, again, the importance of strategic risk. Okay. All right, so what does it mean in very practical and useful terms to marry enterprise risk management and strategic management? All right, there are 6 critical areas as far as I see that you can, integrate these 2 concepts, these 2 theories and business processes. The first is in the strategic planning process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Also in setting key performance indicators and complementary, the key risk indicators. In business analytics, and I'm a big fan of business analytics. And again, I think that is an almost undiscovered area for many businesses, and it's a great value added in integrating strategy and risk management. Obviously in decision making, in the culture and the conversations that happen around the management and senior management and board rooms, and of course in reporting. And I'm going to touch a little bit on reporting. All right, see, strategic planning. So as a hardcore strategic planner, one of the first things that you inherently think about is, okay, what is my core strategy? What is the core strategy of the organization? But then you also have to think about the what ifs. What if? And that is the essence of scenario planning. Now, it starts with a critical uncertainty matrix. Right, it may sound like something new, but it's probably something that happens in the back of your mind without even thinking about it. So when a company is coming up with its base strategy, its base case, its core strategy, it would think about what are the things in the external environment that will impact my organization, and especially in today's world where external events and exogenous shocks play such a critical role in business. That's in the forefront of any planner's, any leader's mind. And how certain am I that this will happen or this will impact my organization? So, as the matrix shows, things that are external factors that are of high importance and of relatively low uncertainty will form the base case. But then there are some high importance external factors that may be surrounded with a lot of uncertainty. And for many businesses, up until March, it would have been the IBF agreement. So there was a lot of uncertainty, but it was very, very important for businesses. Things like that will form the scenarios of a company in the strategic planning ERM process. So how does that start? It really starts with an environmental scan. Again, this is another traditional strategic planning process. And this is actually a summary SketchUp of DBJ's environmental scan, with the clouds and the lightning bolts as threats and the sun as opportunities, and the sun, little sunshine you can see. And that's really where it starts from. And just to give you an idea, especially for those of us who probably haven't gone through the strategic planning process, I'm going to play a little video clip of how we communicate our environmental scan. Okay, so typically an environmental scan would come in the strategic planning process at the stage where businesses are considering where are we now. And in that planning process, the next question is, where do we go, where do we want to be? And so the base case, as I said before, will form majority of the, given the environment that we operate in, and then you would have complemented it with a SWOT analysis or something like that. This is where we are, and okay, against this context, where do you want to carry the organization? Then the scenarios, again, comes in, but what if? What if these things that had high uncertainty actually materializes? For DBJ, last year, 2012, we identified 4 scenarios. The first scenario related to if Jamaica and this has occurred now, in essence, we established a relationship with the IMF, but we assumed very, very strong austerity measures. We actually considered another debt exchange, so this was in December, and we assumed flat economic growth in this scenario. In the second scenario, we assumed that Jamaica did not, or does not, or won't enter into another IMF agreement, and resultant impacts, crippling debt, declining business confidence, anemic growth, etc. The scenario 3 and 4 were a little bit more generic. Scenario 3, acts of God, force majeure, and we did have a positive scenario in terms of economic boom and, strong economic growth, etc. But I shared that with you to share how we applied risk management principles to move beyond just identifying the scenarios to, okay, what do we do? How do we analyze this? How does this translate to strategy? So you would have seen that we were doing analysis in terms of analyzing the impact, the degree of importance, and the probability, the uncertainty, as well as the imminence, and the driving forces of the scenarios. But there was another step to it. How do you manage? And again, for the risk managers, these management strategies should be very familiar. How can we exploit? And that is a side of strategic risk management that, we have to be very, very mindful of. How can we mitigate and transfer, avoid, etc. So let's see how we, at DBJ, kind of put that into practice. All right, so for the first scenario, which was IMF agreement, and we assumed strong austerity, JDX2, and we looked on, okay, what were the major driving forces of the scenario? How would it impact the country? And how would it specifically impact DBJ? And we sketched what that impact would look like. Then we said to ourselves, okay, how do we respond if this scenario should occur? What changes to our strategy would we have to make? How can we exploit this scenario? So we came up with some broad ideas of how we could exploit a scenario such as strong austerity, etc. One of the things, for example, that I should tell you about DBJ, we wholesale loans for the main part. So we do lend directly, but we wholesale our loans, or we on-lend through the commercial banks and through microfinance institutions as well. And as you would recall, with the first debt exchange, banks suddenly had a lot of money, and were very much mindful that they need to take that money and invest in loans, not just government paper. And so the dependence on a DBJ for financing would have been impacted. And so we thought, well, if there's another debt exchange, again, banks again will have cheap money again that they can unlend and would not need to depend on DBJ financing. Everybody with me? Yeah. So we said, okay, how can we, so if that happened, what do we do? One of the things we said is that we're going to push our PPP strategy, especially because we assumed flat growth. And that would be the more dominant business, so it would be almost a shift in business strategy. Another shift in business strategy would be to lend more directly. Of course, that comes with a myriad of risks, but we'd have to do that if it came down to that. And of course, there's some mitigating strategies. So I went into that level of detail for us to think about, even in your own organization, how you can apply risk management practices and strategic management into exploiting or mitigating or coming up with management strategies for your scenarios. All right, and the second scenario, likewise, I won't go into the details of it, but similar response. What are the major driving forces? How will it impact the country? How will it impact the company? And what can we do to mitigate or exploit? And in some of the other scenarios, we looked on how can we transfer some of the risk and how can we avoid, or should we just accept So we looked on the full, generic risk management strategies. Sorry. Good to go. All right. So I did say that we're going to stress and focus on 2 areas of integration. So the first was integrating ERM and strategic management in the strategic planning phase. Another phase that is on the tail end is in reporting, and specifically dashboard reporting, which is, as you know, the latest trend and a very effective means of communication, especially at the board level. So we are used to, most organizations are used to KPIs. And so this is a print screen of what DBJ's KPI dashboard kind of looks like. So we're used to this. Now, how can we integrate risk reporting in a dashboard scenario? So not only should we, inform the board, these are our key performance indicators, these are the key things and critical things happening in the business, but what risk exposure do we face? What are the key risks that we need to be mindful of? And so I was fortunate to be at the GARP convention this year, where James Lamb presented on reporting. And one of the things, so these concepts have been borrowed from his presentation. And one of the things that he pushed, and quite passionately, is moving from traditional risk reporting to ERM dashboard reporting. All right, so one of the things that we probably can relate to is, in traditional risk reporting, is analysis by silos. So if you think of our own organizations, we probably have strategy management in one section, and you'll probably have risk management in another section. If it's a bank, you will have a credit risk management unit. And if there's a risk report that needs to come from the bank, then the credit risk management unit will prepare their risk reports. If for some reason the management wants to have an idea of what the operational risks are, HR will prepare something on operational risk, then marketing will prepare something on operational risk, and so on and so forth. So it's a siloed approach. One of the big things for ERM and in ERM reporting, there must be some kind of integration. So how do these pieces fit together? What does it all mean for the corporation as a whole, and not, kind of piecemeal in departments and functions? Another comparison is with traditional risk reporting. The focus is on historical trends, and we see that especially for financial risk management. In terms of ERM reporting, again, the focus has to be forward-thinking, which kind of ties into, so what? Yes, these are the risks that have incurred, but what are the risks that eminence has increased because of external factors, or because we shifted strategy, or because we added a new business line? So it's more forward thinking, and so on. I have to be mindful of the time. James Lamb again kind of suggests that an ERM dashboard should answer 5 questions. And I was literally at the edge of my seat, because it just so happened that at that point in time, I was considering, how can I integrate risk management and reporting to the board? So I would, since strategy comes under me as well, I would have been responsible for giving information on key risk indicators, etc. But I was saying, how can I sneak in some risk management into this reporting framework as well? So, first thing he says, are any of our business objectives at risk? It sounds so obvious, right? But I don't know in how many organizations do we actually think about that, and at the board level or even at the management level. So we talk about a lot of things, but do we think, okay, this is the reason why we exist, and are these objectives at risk or not? Another one, simple. Are we compliant with, with policies and regulations? And that one is, very much self-explanatory. Important questions that we may not ask enough at that level. what risk incidents have been escalated. So now, in the ERM framework, how it should really work is at the operational level, there should be some kind of reporting to the ERM level. And if the operational risk being faced at the functional level is of such significance, then there should be some escalation, and in DBJ's case, to the ERM risk committee, and then escalation, if needed again, to the board. So there must be some kind of chain in the information flow, and how do you escalate risk from the ground level up. What key risk indicators and trends require immediate attention? Again, a critical question to be asked at the board level and at the senior management level. An example I can think about of a key risk indicator that was triggered at DBJ and did require immediate attention had to relate to foreign exchange risk. And as a development bank, DBJ depends a lot on multilateral financing. Now, that financing doesn't come in Jamaican dollars. That financing is going to come in US, more than likely. And the demand for loans for typical Jamaican businesses are not in US dollars, they're in Jamaican dollars. So there is some kind of risk, well, not some kind of risk, the foreign currency risk that comes into play. And so in order to, one of the strategies that DBJ had employed, we had several strategies from guarantees and different entities bearing the foreign exchange risk. One of the strategies that we pursued was pricing for the foreign exchange risk. So we set up a foreign exchange risk pricing model. We made some assumptions of where the foreign exchange rate would have been, and now I'm talking about 2012, probably mid-year. Mid-year 2012, the Jamaican dollar was on its A game. Currency was appreciating, or at least stable. And so we thought, okay, let us look on the average devaluation over 20 years, or let us do a regression and see where it would end up, or let's just, do some what-if kind of scenarios. And then we came up with, about 3 scenarios for our pricing model, and so we ended up pricing a loan for the foreign exchange risk. So we all know what happened since last year, June, they're about to, up until, where did we almost hit the 100? March, April, because we're still kind of sub-100. I don't think anybody, well, maybe some of the smart people in this room, would have known that the dollar would have devaluated to that level so rapidly. So one of the things that we had to do is, once the assumed level of our pricing model was hit, so if we assumed, for argument's sake, 98 or 99, once that was hit, it required immediate attention. So it meant that we would have had to be tracking these key risk indicators monthly or weekly. And so when that trigger point occurred, we had to make some decisions, what do we do now? And thankfully, we had many other strategies that we could have employed and have employed to manage and mitigate that risk. And the 5th thing that an ERM dashboard should answer is, what risk assessments need to be reviewed? And it's kind of related to the story I just told as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you a few examples of what some of the strategic risk reports look like at DBJ, at least at skeleton. And we're again trying to answer those 5 questions. So we would report at a very high level, what are the number of occasions or the number of times our strategic activities carried us outside of the defined tolerance levels and appetite level of the board? So the board would have previously said, this is our appetite level, and these are our tolerance levels. So it would have been set in our policy. So the board would want to know, did you deviate from our tolerance? Did you deviate from our appetite? We'd look on things like, what are the key business risk incidents that have occurred? What key business risks have been triggered? And we look on things again. Overall, as I said, we give direct loans, we wholesale loans. and wholesaling is our major channel. What is the level of risk that we face per channel? So at a very high level, this is what a summary dashboard, and at this side, we'd use, colors and traffic signals and, red flags, etc., to indicate where we're at. Another view in terms of a dashboard is as it relates to our key business risk. So many of us would be familiar with a risk register, and you probably would use Excel to do your risk register, and you say, these are the risks, this is the impact level, the probability, this is the overall level, this is the management strategies, etc. But again, it's very useful that at the end of the day, at a glance, you can look and say, okay, our risks are concentrated in this quadrant, which happens to be low risk, or which one is our highest risk, which one is our lowest risk, what is the modal risk, on average, what does our risk profile look like. So again, dashboard reporting, then drill to detail. Having defined the key business risk, again, going into a little bit more detail about how they report on key business risk. Very practical. Dashboard, again, you'd want to know what are the number of times these key business risks have been triggered in the organization. You'd want to know, okay, what were they? What was the key risk indicator? What exactly happened? And of course, for my financial people, what is the value at risk or the actual loss incurred as a result of the triggered key business risk? And then not only that, remember we said, ERM is about being forward-looking. What are the key business risks that are in danger of being triggered? One of the things at the strategic level that our risk manager should always bear in mind is to minimize surprises. Board or senior management or managing directors do not like to be surprised. So as much as we can minimize surprises, which again is risk management, uncertainty, the better it is for our business. This is a detailed kind of snapshot of what a key business risk report would look like in detail. All right, tolerance. Again, as I said, there would be predefined tolerance levels for DBJ and for many businesses as well. It's important to report regularly, at least quarterly, on how the organization has been in relation to remaining within or deviating from tolerance levels. So again, a little dashboard type summary of what were the tolerance levels that were breached and what are tolerance levels that you believe will be in danger is very, very useful. And then, if necessary, I drill to detail. So this is a detailed report of our tolerance levels, etc. Very, very importantly, and many, many organizations leave off this aspect. And again, this is critical in merging strategic management and enterprise risk management. It's important to track external risk indicators. So many businesses look on their KPIs, their targets, etc. But a lot of times where we fall short is that we don't track our key external indicators. And why do we need to track it? Remember we spoke kind of in depth about scenario planning. How do we know if a scenario is triggered or not? We have to be tracking. So once, in the same way as we track our KPIs, in terms of, looking on trends, etc. So we can know that a scenario is being triggered or is at risk of being triggered, and we can right away say, okay, what are the strategies that we're going to implement? All right, how am I with time? This is my last slide. Sure. Just some rules of thumb based on the little experience that I have in this area. It's best for strategy and ERM to have the same home. I believe this 100%. I've been in situations where Strategy is way over woy, and risk management is way over on the other side, and never ever the twain shall meet, like never ever. And it's important, again, to add sustainable value to an organization, that there's some level of integration. And I found that it works best in one home. So it might be useful for organizations to create positions such as mine that forces you to merge risk management and strategy management. Some might say, you know, you're just getting the best of both worlds at one price. But it works. It works. And oldie but a goodie. Board support and ownership is critical. That cannot be overstated. It is absolutely essential for both risk management and strategy management, and both integrated to work. It is the prerogative of a board to oversee the strategy of an organization, and it's also the prerogative of a board to manage or have oversight of the risks. So again, board support is critical. It's useful to have a focused committee that just looks on enterprise risk management, but it also works in other organizations where ERM function is probably merged with an existing committee. But as long as there is some kind of oversight, whether it is every quarter the board just focuses on what are the risks that we need to be mindful of, but there needs to be board support in that area. All right, so if we are here and maybe we are tasked with coming up with an enterprise risk management framework for our organization, how do we start? And we feel inspired that this must kind of relate to the organization strategy. Where do you start? For me, it's best to start at the start, which is at strategic planning. It's always best to start it at that step. However, if you have to begin setting up an ERM framework mid-strategic planning cycle, then reporting, kind of sneaking it in the reporting is a good area to start as well. Culture change is a must. All right, so ERM is new. We all agree, well, it's not that new anymore, but definitely integrating ERM and strategy is pretty new. Therefore, as with anything new, it requires a culture change. Culture change is never, ever easy. From experience, my own personality is that I like to go hard, and it has gotten me in trouble many times, and and my boss has to save me many times because I know what I want and I know what needs to be achieved, and I push. But that doesn't come without its own risk. So my advice is to go hard, but go very, very smart. Very, very smart. Use the best of both worlds. So if you know strategy, try to learn risk management and apply it to strategy. And if you know risk management, try to learn the strategic planning parts of things and apply it to risk management. Try as much as possible to grab the best concepts and the best models and the best methodologies from the both worlds and kind of fuse your own path with it. Relating to this is utilizing the two sides of your brain, the right brain and the left brain. And the only example I can think about that shows both is I happen to be married to a hardcore numbers person, analytics, an economist turned risk manager, numbers, hardcore. However, I've seen where he has had to think beyond financial risk management to ERM, and is actually setting up an ERM framework now. So my advice to him, if there's ever a time that he may be in this room, and this is the only time he would ever listen to me probably, is use both sides of your brain you have to grab hold of the creative parts as well. For me, as I said, I'm a career strategic planner. So the right side of my brain was very, very, very always active. I was forced to dig deep and to hone the analytical side as well. And both sides have been working well to integrate these two fields. And my final thought, I'm back with a glass, but as we see now, the glass is irrelevant whether the glass is half empty or half full. But what is relevant is that something is being poured into that glass. So if there's anything at all that I want us all to remember, is that we have to keep adding value strategically, protecting that value through risk management. And that is whether in your organization and, dare I say, in our own lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudine Tracey, for a very valuable and insightful presentation. Two very important themes I believe you articulated very well was one, that strategic risk management is all about protecting the value of an organization, and two, that there is critical importance in scenario planning in executing SRM, especially with respect to your environmental plan concept. The first question, which is, I noticed earlier on one of your slides, you presented an organization chart where you separated, I think, strategy and your ERM unit with the risk champions. I don't know if that has, if you could speak to your philosophy with regards to risk decentralization, or if you have a centralized risk approach at DBJ.
Okay. All right. ERM essentially is about integration. The fact is that integration is still going to be achieved through consolidating risk at the business level. So the business level, the functional units, marketing and HR and finance, still, as I said, have its own operational risks that have to be managed, and they have to be managed at that level. And in the management of those risks, that's where the risk champions come in. So the risk champions are persons that reside in that unit, in that department, but have a unofficial dotted line relationship to the ERM strategy unit to ensure that risks are being identified at that unit, that those risks are being monitored, that risk reports are coming up to the ERM strategy unit level, and then where escalation or where oversight and management, depending on how critical those risks are, it will happen under the ERM and strategy unit. I don't know if I'm not
Opening the floor for questions.
In going through some of the examples of the scenarios that that I presented, there were examples of exploiting the risks. So let me give you one example that was there. If you recall, there was a scenario considering a signed IMF agreement, but with very strong austerity measures and with a second debt exchange that may have impacted the demand for loans, right, from DBJ. And one of the things that I highlighted was, okay, how do we respond to this? How can we exploit? How can we see the upside of this risk occurring? And one of the things, three other things that we have in our plan as we speak is shifting focus more on privatizations and PPPs. So it would almost be a shift in business model. So no longer concentrating so much, if it came to that, remember this is a risk, on wholesaling per se, but channeling more resources to the PPP privatization aspect of our business, or lending more directly. So those will be opportunities looking on the upside of a potentially negative event. One of the things that ERM forces you to do is to track indicators. And not only your key risk indicators, which is almost inherently focused on the downside, right? But also tracking the key performance indicators of a business as well as the external indicators. And those external indicators that you can track, GDP, inflation, exchange rate, can be positive or negative. Or it can be negative, and again, you use that as an opportunity to exploit or to trigger an alternative strategy. So it's not just focusing on key risk indicators. Again, it may be that you're looking on your key performance indicators, your targets, and seeing that you have a positive thing is that you have increased, your targets are moving exponentially, increasing by 100%, 200%, 300%. What does that mean? What kind of uncertainty does that mean for the business? Does the business need to grow, to expand? What are the risks that can emanate from that? So it's not just looking on your key risk indicators, but all the indicators of the business. In communicating information to the board, as I said, I believe dashboarding is the best method because it allows you to see the highlights, and then you can kind of drill to details thereafter. And for me, in highlight, there are 4 things that I believe will give the board of directors at a very quick glance, where are we right now in terms of our risk exposure? And it is looking on, are we within our tolerance limits or outside of our tolerance limits? So that's message 1. 2, we have these key business risk indicators. Have they been triggered or not? That's 2. 3, we are a bank. What is our exposure level vis-a-vis our main lending channels? I said 4. 3. And thereafter, then, well, if we're outside of the tolerance level, then what? Why? What are the activities outside of those levels? What can we do? Do we need to change those levels, or do we need to come back within? So it starts the thought process, and it starts the decision-making process, and you keep drilling to detail thereafter. But for me, it's that, in terms of our appetite and tolerance levels, where are we? And in terms of our key business risk or our strategic risk, what has happened? One of the things that I'm a big proponent of is trying to put a dollar value or quantifying risk as qualitative as they may be, because with ERM you're going to get a lot of qualitative type risk, but to put a number value on what the potential impact is. So in doing your risk register, especially for key business risk, and you're analyzing impact, and you think about, and in reporting you think about, what is the financial impact of this risk that has been triggered. So we try to quantify that, and the aggregation would be adding up all the financial impact of all the risks that have been triggered, and we call it I really don't want to say VAR, because I'm going to get myself in trouble, but it sells a quantitative, a financial figure to say this is the risk exposure in dollar values, and all board members know to speak dollar value, and of the risks that have occurred, and sometimes take it a step further, and this is the impact that it will have or it could have on the bottom line of the organization. So that plus the other things that I said before. One of the things that we have seen that large development banks do, such as the Business Development Bank of Canada, is that they have business consultancy services. And in fact, the BDC has an enterprise risk management consultancy service that they provide at a cost to different organizations, and it's highly successful. So, that's a potential income earner. But I take your point. It's a good point. All right, so the first question is, how do you reconcile the role of an enterprise risk management committee with that of an audit committee? All right, let me go back to James Lamb first, because again, I think he is the authority on this matter. He, again, in 2003, he predicted that audit committees would eventually evolve into risk management committees. I respectfully disagree. I don't think that's the right way. I believe that audit should maintain their level of independence. And how it works at the DBJ is that the audit committee will have, just as they have in managing the effectiveness and the controls of any other function, they would do that for the enterprise risk management function. Again, I use the analogy of the 3 lines of defense in terms of practically, in my mind at least, how audit works. First line of defense, and this kind of answers your second question as well. First line of defense is at the department level, at the unit level. You manage your own risk. If it's an HR risk, you are the HR manager, you have a responsibility to manage that risk, etc., etc. ERM is a second line of defense. It starts at the strategic level by providing hands-on oversight of the strategic or the key business risk. So it's a partnership. So if it's a financial risk, that's a key risk, or a strategic risk, then there's a partnership in the ownership and the management of that risk with the functional owner. But there may be some other operational risks that would not come up to the level of the ERM level, but in essence, again, it's the second line of defense for the company. And audit, for me, again, is the third line of defense. Last analogy, I see it as, as an exam, as a course. For me, the enterprise risk management function is more like coursework. So you have the lecturer who would help you along in preparing that coursework. You submit something, give you tips, and no, change that, change this, change that, and it's a process. Final exam, audit. So that's how it kind of works in my mind. In terms of responsibility and accountability, let me start with James Lamb. He says, he believes that the internal risk management function should be evaluated by a lessening in the degree of variability of business performance, especially negative variability. So meaning, at the end of the day, if it is that a company cannot reasonably stabilize the fluctuations in their performance by managing its risks, then something is wrong with the ERM function. In terms of who should be held accountable for a risk, if a risk is escalated to the level of a strategic risk or a key business risk, then the ERM function should own that and should be held accountable. But that does not mean that the functional person has no accountability. Okay. Let me touch on communication first and foremost. I believe that whoever is in charge of ERM, or strategy for that matter, has to make up their mind that they have to be an evangelist. They just have to be, right? That's a part of the pushing hard. And communication is a big part of it, because most persons are at the mindset of the glass is half full concept, that risk management is about negativity. And especially at the functional level, there is a feeling of, threat. Feels threatened because they believe risk management is about highlighting controls or lack thereof. So there is a barrier that you have to break in that communication process to kind of show persons the value added of risk management, that it is not additional work, it is not to highlight your weaknesses or your failures, but it's to help to manage your operations. So success at that level for me is persons buying in and has become so ingrained in the culture and the management of at the functional level that it's almost seamless, that risk management is not the enemy, but it's an enabler of my function or my area. Buy-in overall for me is the quality of the decision making of the corporation. I'm fortunate enough, thank God again for my boss, to be able to sit in on board meetings. So in my mind, I can see the evolution of how the board considers risk in their decision making. And so for me, the success of the program is the deliberations that happen at that boardroom table, and how much how much risk and the practice of risk management influences those decisions and the quality of those decisions.
Thank you. Please help me show appreciation to Claudine Tracey. behalf of GARP and the Caribbean chapter, I want to present a small token of appreciation, and this is the GARP water bottle. They were thinking from the creative side of their brain here. I mean, it's the first token I've seen looking like this from them, but it's good. It stands, folds, freezes. It's dishwasher safe and so on. But thank you very much. All right.